Hey everyone, I hope you're all doing well and welcome back to the channel. So today we're looking at the Vought F8U-2 Crusader, also known as the last of the gunfighters, as it was the last US military fighter that used guns as its primary armament. However, in the top tier meta known as Missile Thunder, the F8's guns should definitely not be considered its primary weapon system, but more on that later. I was lucky enough to be given a 14-day test drive of this aircraft, and after getting a decent amount of playtime with it, I feel confident enough now to give it a credible review. The F8 is a rank 6 American aircraft. It sits at a battle rating of 9.7 for arcade and sim, and 10.0 for RB. The 9.7 battle rating makes the F8 an excellent choice for your first jet in a EC7 sim lineup. With EC7 having a battle rating spread of 9.7 to 10.7, you can take this aircraft out as many times as you'd like with no spawn point cost or respawn timer penalties, which is quite nice. So performance-wise, it is very fast for its battle rating. Without suspended armament and spaded, the F8 has a top speed of around 2,038 km an hour at an altitude of 10,600 meters. Now, of course, when you first unlock it, the F8 will be be a bit slower than that as a stock aircraft, but it will still be pretty damn quick for its tier, which is always nice. Now, with this speed comes a price to be paid, of course. The F8's wings are extremely fragile at speed due to the tilt wing system and the general shape and design of the aircraft itself. So if you pull tight turns above, say, 900 km an hour, you are at serious risk of ripping a wing, and that risk becomes an almost guarantee if you exceed 10 Gs. It also has a nasty habit of wanting to wing stall if you turn too sharply, so be very, very careful with that. That being said, the F8 has excellent flight performance, provided you don't overdo it and you fly it to its strengths. It has excellent energy retention and does especially well in long sweeping turns and high-speed engagements with lots of vertical maneuvers. Now, taking a look at its armament, the F8 comes with 4 20mm Browning Colt Mark 12 cannons, the Mod 3 variants, with a fairly generous 576 rounds of ammunition between them. Now, despite being the last of the gunfighters, the F8 actually has one of the lowest burst mass stats for its battle rating. So if you hold the trigger for 1 second, you'll be sending 7.3 kilos of cannon rounds downrange towards your target, which sounds fairly potent all considering. However, many other aircraft at this tier are sending down 10, 12, or even 13 kilos of red-hot death per second. To make things worse, the other US fighters at this tier have, on average, more ammunition per gun as well. Now, of course, this is largely the result of the F8 being a naval fighter, which usually requires weight or space saving in the form of lighter or fewer guns, ammo, or offensive ordnance in general. But it is something you do need to consider if you unlock this jet and want to grind out the first missile module without using GE to buy it first, as you'll be solely relying on these guns. Now, speaking of missiles, it has the option to be fitted out with AIM-9Bs and later on the vastly superior AIM-9D Sidewinder missiles. The AIM-9Bs are a Tier 1 modification, meaning you can get to work on researching them pretty much straight away. You have the option to fit them in sets of 2 or 4, though I don't really see a situation where you would choose to take out anything other than the maximum amount of air-to-air missiles, but it is there if you'd rather only take 2 instead of 4. I'm always going to be taking out 4, I don't know about you guys. Now, the F8 also has the option to be fitted with some Zuni Mark 32 ATAP unguided rockets, and also, amusingly, some 32 Mighty Mouse rockets. Why amusingly? Well, it comes down to where they're stored, and it's not actually something that's shown in the game, so I shall put up a quick graphic on the screen here to demonstrate what I'm talking about. Now, the cluster of 32 rockets were housed in a rocket pack that sat in the underside of the aircraft just aft of the guns. An actuator was used to tilt down the pack when the rockets were to be fired. Now, this was not only a weird place to stow the rockets, but also a fairly dangerous one, something I plan to cover in more detail in a new series of historical videos that I'm planning, and hopefully the first of those will be out fairly soon. But long story short, the rockets were prone to jamming in the rack, which of course is inconvenient at best and fatally catastrophic at worst. Now, before we get into the gameplay, there is one more key feature of the F8 that I need to mention, and one that hopefully gets removed soon. Right now, this thing has an airspawn. and it is ludicrously overpowered because of it. You can spawn into a sim game and get over 6,000 meters in altitude in the first 60 seconds of the game. Combine that with a good radar and 4 air-to-air missiles, and you have a potentially epic seal clubber if you play your cards right. As I said, hopefully this is something that gets addressed soon, as I feel that giving this thing an airspawn is completely needless and makes it far too OP compared to other things at its tier. But anyway, let's hop into a game before I waffle on any longer, shall we? So today's game is featured on the Maginot Line map, which is one of a few different maps that are found throughout all of the game modes in War Thunder, for those of you that don't know. So the small map in arcade and realistic for tanks and that, which has got, you know, the castle and all of that, that is actually part of a much larger map, which is what you see here, which is found in Sim and in some ARB games as well. So it's all just one big map. It just gets cropped down to different sizes depending on what game mode you're in. Obviously the tank one is a bit more detailed on the ground map side of things, but the general terrain and layout aside from that is pretty much the same. Now, the first engagement we have is with just a bot, I will say, that I found wandering around at the start of this game. Tried a bit of target practice with the guns, but still not 100% certain on my accuracy with them, so I decided to pop a rocket off before the bot decides to activate its anti-gravity boosters and somehow get a reversal on me when it really shouldn't, because they're quite prone to doing that. Now, before I get further into the gameplay with this, I just wanted to show you this quick clip here as a demonstration of what I meant with the wings of the F8 being fragile. So we're in a relatively short dive here, like we didn't drop down from too high in altitude, and we're about to get a deflection on this plane. We miss, so we pull up and boom, the wing rips instantly. So, yeah, you really can't afford to be doing high-speed type maneuvers in this plane. The wings just don't handle it. So consider that a literal example of what not to do with the Crusader. If you're going to turn, do long sweeping turns or pop your air brakes, drop your speed a bit, and then turn if you really need to turn quickly. Now, after a bit of patience, we are finally rewarded with our first gun kill of the game. One of only a few, unfortunately, most of them are with missiles, but this was against a Chinese Q5 that we had chased down and ended up going kind of like, not head-on, but sort of diagonally on a course with it, and chopped off its wings nice and easily. Overall, despite the lack of ammunition compared to other aircraft and the lack of burst mass weight with this, these cannons still slap. So provided you get them on target, overall they're still going to be great at taking out aircraft despite the lack of ammunition. Relatively speaking, I mean, it's a huge wealth of ammunition compared to things like Russian jets that only get, you know, 60 rounds per gun. Now, speaking of not guns, a AIM-9D just went off in the general direction of a enemy F-100. It was an airfield defender, but it does a good job of demonstrating that they are quite good at range. Provided you get a good lock with the heat seeker, you can fire them up to 4 or 5 kilometers out, but that is like their extreme range and the target needs to be going quite slowly. If you're chasing a target going supersonic, you want to drop that range to like 2 or 3 kilometers if you can. They do obviously pull better Gs than the AIM-9B, but if you can get it on the closest course possible, you're obviously going to be in the best luck. Now, we're just clapping a Yak-38 out of the sky that just happened to use his own missile on a friendly. We didn't get in just in time to save them, but we at least avenged them. And Yak-38s were definitely a flavour of the month for the enemy team in this particular game, because we came across another one not too long after this. We fired a missile, but he saw it coming, pulled a quick evasive and was able to get out of the way, so we decided to go into a gunfight situation here. Now, whoever was piloting this Yak-38 definitely knew how to pull some very janky turns. They popped their air brake, did a bit of a corkscrew there and forced us to overshoot at pretty high speed, and then they went straight into a sharp turn fight. Now, if they wanted to get guns on us, that is probably the best thing they could have done. However, if they miss their shots, or if they stuff up their initial turn with the Yak-38, it's kind of game over, because that aircraft bleeds speed a lot faster than the F8 does. And after initially recovering from the shock of being forced into a sudden type maneuver fight in an aircraft with very rippable wings, we get on the offensive here. The Yak-38 runs out of energy, and we are able to get into a much better position where we can get a nice deflection shot and take them out. So, if you're in a Yak-38 fighting an F8, kill it on the first run, otherwise it's probably going to kill you in return unless you get incredibly lucky. As with most jets, as you run them on afterburner for too long, you tend to have a habit of running out of fuel, so we head back to base to refuel and rearm our missiles as well. And unfortunately, on the way over, we get slapped out of the sky by an F104, which was a bit rude. However, we were able to take advantage of our airspawn. I knew exactly where the F104 was because he shot me down over the runway. I dove down from my spawn in altitude and engaged hot pursuit, and because I came in from a higher altitude and was already at a good cruising speed, despite the 104 being kind of faster in some ways, we were actually able to eventually close the distance on this guy and repay them in kind for blasting us on our final approach there. So bit of sweet revenge there. You're probably detecting a pattern now where I'm using the missiles quite generously, and you have to. Even though this was designed with guns as the primary armament, if you've got missiles, you should use the missiles first, because if you can get your enemy out of the sky at a safe distance without endangering your own aircraft, it's of course going to be a win. And of course, you know, the meta of top tier is you're going to be using the best weapons available, and the best weapons in this situation is going to be a missile, unless you're fighting someone in a janky T2 like we have here. And also, there was a bit of a bug there. You'll notice that I didn't fire my missile until the last minute. I was actually mashing the fire button for ages, and for whatever reason it wasn't releasing, even though we weren't pulling high Gs. I don't know, but that missile should have gone off a lot further back, and it probably cost us that particular kill on that approach. But we decide to go in for a bit of a close quarters action with the T2, who is being flown very well, doing some very good evasive maneuvers, just staying out of our field of fire here, pulling some very fancy and tight turns, as you can probably see on the screen here. I'm being incredibly cautious to not put myself in a wing stall, and we're actually about to get out of the battlefield itself, and I'm trying my hardest to end this fight before we get reset and spat back into the map at a completely different altitude and heading, and we just get the T2 before that happens. Now, the next opponent we came across was a MiG-21, and I did think this one was going to give us quite a bit of trouble, but I'm guessing it was either a relatively new player to MiG-21s or a relatively stock aircraft, because this thing, if it wanted to, could theoretically run circles around me, but it chooses not to do so. That being said, you'll notice here I'm going at a fairly fast pace, so I'm not taking the F8 into any particularly tight turns. I do pop the air brake for a couple of seconds there just to make sure that I don't overshoot the MiG-21, because they aren't going particularly fast. They're not on full afterburner or anything like that, so overshoots can be a real issue with this, because it does accelerate very well, but on its own without the air brake, I find the Corsair does an excellent job of keeping its speed when you just throttle down. Like, it takes a while to decelerate, so if you're fighting an F8, they can be quite easy to force an overshoot if they don't have their air brakes bound to a button on the keyboard or the joystick or whatever peripheral they're choosing to use to control their stuff. Now, I was in this Maginot Line game for pretty much the entire 3 hours of this game. We did end up, I think we lost this one just, unfortunately. No, we won it. We just won it. But I'm not featuring much of the gameplay on this one because this was a particularly dry game, even though it ended in our favor. When using the F8, definitely, for the time being until it's obviously removed, make good use of its airspawn, because it does put you in a very good strategic position whenever you respawn from either being shot down or from being rearmed on the runway. You're going to be dropped in instantly at I think like 2,000 or 3,000 meters with a huge speed and energy advantage, and you can use that to your advantage like so. So this dogfight with the AK-38 here, I am going to say, ends with me absolutely binning it into the ground, which you'll see in about 20 seconds time. My own stupid mistake, I got a little bit cocky with this one. But this is a good demonstration though. I wanted to show you here of how this thing handles when it is low and fast. It's got pretty decent roll rate because it's got quite a narrow profile, so this thing rolls well. It doesn't have the insane roll weight of a F104, but it's definitely better than things like an F100. This is a very good point to make, because what this thing does really well is rolling scissors. If you can get into a dogfight where you can get your enemy into some rolling scissors, pop the air brake and force him into an overshoot, it can be a guaranteed kill with guns or missiles depending on your fighting style. The issue you may have is if your enemy forces you into a horizontal turn fight. Don't get dragged into those. That is the easiest way to wing stall or wing rip. If you need to do sharp turns, well, not sharp turns, if you need to do turns in this aircraft, do it out of plane. Now, speaking of getting out of plane, I'm about to exit the plane violently here. So we're chasing the Yak-38 along the river, and he's pulling quite a few maneuvers. Now, we're out of missiles at this point, so I'm having to rely on guns. I think I found a good solution to get guns on him, so I pull in a bit too quick, and with a bit too much airspeed, and boom, I'm into the side of the riverbank. Now that's all from that game I wanted to show you, and what I also wanted to quickly show you here is what happens when you have a top tier jet that gets given an airspawn. You're in a well-populated game, so there's a population of at least 8 or 10 players on both teams, and you happen to be on comms with your teammates, and you are able to track down and shoot down any fighter, attacker, bomber, or zombie that you can find with relative impunity, because every single time you take off, get shot down, or rearmed, you are instantly at combat altitude. What you're going to see over the next 30 to 40 seconds is a really condensed clip of this game where I ended up finishing with over 30 kills. So enjoy. Well, I hope you enjoyed that little mini cinematic at the end of that one. I did want to feature a another kind of full game commentary for the F8. Unfortunately, I've been having a lot of issues with my actual recordings recently, and the quality of my videos is something that I'm really picky with, and a lot of them, just the resolution and the clarity of what I had recorded, I wasn't happy with. I think I've figured out the issue now after reinstalling all of my recording software, tweaking with settings and everything, so hopefully we should get a bit more gameplay back into these videos again. However, the other thing is the F8 is in such a good position right now that all of the games that I recorded with it just felt really repetitive. It was literally fly around, ping something with the radar, point, click, boom. It doesn't make for exciting gameplay. That's why I enjoy the tiers where you don't have jets as much still, just because, the dogfights are a bit different. Every dogfight's a little bit different than the last one, and it isn't just find an enemy, lock it with a missile, point, click, delete. Which, can be fun in its own right, but I think we still need to get some extra stuff added into top tier to make it a bit more interesting before I can commit to doing nothing but top tier, because I'll go insane otherwise. But yeah, that's the F8U-2 Crusader. A very nice addition to the ever-growing top-tier American lineup that you need for sim or RB or arcade for that matter. I have flown it in all 3 game modes. It is a lot of fun in RB and arcade, although in RB at the moment it doesn't get the airspawn, so if you're against Russia with lots of people flying Su-17s and stuff, you could get slapped out the sky pretty easily by them because you don't have RWR. Something that I didn't mention in the sim gameplay of this is, yes, this thing doesn't have RWR, so if somebody is painting you with their radar and is getting radar lock on you, you are not going to know unless you have your head on a swivel, so that is something very important to bear in mind with this. But yes, back to RB. It's suffering a little bit. I wouldn't say it's suffering, but it's at a disadvantage because it doesn't have RWR, so you've got to be a bit more conscious of your surroundings, especially with it being 10.0 and not 9.7. And rightly, it should be 10.0 with the way compression is at the moment. Like, it shouldn't be any lower than that. Like, no way. Closing comments on it. Overall, I like it. The guns are good despite the slightly lackluster ammunition count, and they don't punch as hard as some of the other guns on other American jets. This thing, overall, it's very maneuverable. It is interesting that it's basically a dedicated fighter for the American tree, because like most American top tier jets we've had so far are massively multi-role. Like, you know, they've got guns, missiles, and heaps of bombs. This doesn't really have any bombs. It has a couple of rockets. That's it. So it's kind of a unique one in the US tree at the moment. And I'm looking forward to seeing more naval fighters being added in the future, particularly if we start seeing the new airports coming into the game, where we have longer runways, so taking off and landing will be a lot less painful and explodey. Especially if we can get some better airfield defenses, that'd be nice as well. But anyway, I'm waffling. That is the F8U-2, guys. Hope you guys enjoyed this video. Once again, thank you all so much for watching. I love your support, love you all, and you have yourself a wonderful day, and I will catch you all next time. Goodbye.